Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
This has been brought to you by Megger, a company that has been serving the electrical test and measurement industry for over 100 years.
Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. You know, today we have a very interesting man who's going to tell us a tremendous amount of information about the law. And he was a partner at the law firm of Yuriy, Moshes, PC, a former senior litigation counsel at the Phillips and Associates, and he studied international relationships at New York University, and so much more is on his plate because he just loves what he does, and I'll ask him about that. Do you really love it, Yuriy? Just welcome to our show, and please give us an answer to that because not every lawyer loves what he does, but how about you?
Thanks for having me, Susan. I absolutely love helping people achieve justice, whether it's in the employment realm, housing, or at a place of public accommodation. I handle all types of discrimination issues, wage and hour issues in employment, housing, and public accommodation.
Let's just jump to the chase now. And we have a new president. Everybody knows our Mr. President Trump. And we know that immigration is high up on his desire to do things and change things. What do you think about Trump's immigration laws and the way he feels about people in Mexico and the fact that he wants to build a wall? What is that, when you hear that, what does it bring up for you?
Well, for an immigrant myself, and I came from the former Soviet Union in 1989, this policy and just the retort from the new administration is divisive and exclusive. Rather than being based on what this country is all about and what it was built on, which is an inclusive policy built on immigrants and getting people together to achieve a common goal.
What do you expect that is going to happen? Because he's drawing a lot of attention on this issue, and in addition to which, a lot of people are talking about it because how many millions upon millions of dollars does he want to spend on the wall? And remember, when Reagan was there, they actually took the wall down from Germany, not built it up. So, again, give me your opinion about what's going on and, you know, how people ought to deal with this.
Well, the wall is only going to backfire. You're going to, if it actually, I don't believe that he's actually going to do it because there's logistics that he doesn't understand. But if he does come around and builds the wall, you're going to start seeing souring relations with other countries. You'll see less immigrants who do most of the hard work in the country, and the economy will start to fail. But for workers, and I see this now, you have a lot of, Trump is really only affecting federal law. You have a lot of immigrant, non-resident alien employees who still pay taxes, should still be paid proper wages. They're afraid to come forward because they're afraid that if they sue their employer or bring a claim, they may be deported.
Really? So now let's go a little bit further than this. So you say that there are all these immigrants out there who are afraid to talk a little bit about their contribution to the United States. And is that legal? Couldn't they do it and tell everybody what's going on? Because without them, what would we do? How would we get our veggies? How would we get people to help us in our homes? And you know, they do some of the lowest workers' jobs, and without them, what would we do?
Exactly. I think our economy would fail. They handle most of the hard labor, which we've become content in having them handle it and complacent, and we won't be able to do that. It is illegal if you're an immigrant employee, even if you don't have resident status here, even if you may have entered here illegally. It is illegal for you for an employer to retaliate against you for complaints of wage and hour issues or discrimination issues. But that still does not prevent the employer from contacting Homeland Security and having ICE agents come to your home or to your place of work.
I mean, you've been around. Has anybody come to your office, some of these immigrants you're talking about, and have you pleaded their case? And if so, have you won?
Yes. Taking several cases to trial. Most of these cases settle, though, before trial. I'd say about 98% of them, which is still a win for the client because they're getting a big chunk of what they're owed, if not all of it, without the uncertainty of going to trial.
Okay, let's go straight to another question. So how have recent changes in immigration suggested by the president affected the workplace discrimination and wage hour issues? Now, I know you answered that a little bit, but, give us a little more information about that.
Well, unfortunately, it's emboldened employers who've already had these discriminatory animus and the belief that they could exploit immigrant workers with low wages, but the law has prevented them from doing so. And now with the rhetoric coming from the president, you start seeing more employers taking advantage of employees and threatening deportation or complaints to Homeland Security. And that, in effect, has caused the ripple effect where you have employees that are afraid to come forward. They're afraid that the employer is going out to get them, contacted the bad agents, and someone will come to their home.
You see all these movies and what's going on in regard to immigration, and you say to yourself, oh, my God, our country was built on immigrants. I'll tell you the truth. I mean, my grandparents came here. They loved this country. They thought it was a fantastic opportunity for them to earn a living, in addition to which they also went to night school to learn English. But today, we go to different towns, and all we see is a particular town, and depending on, of course, who the immigrants are. For example, the Koreans, you go to a town and you see all the information that they have on their shop is in their language. What is your opinion of that? Because that also creates a lot of what should I call it? A lot of fear,
tension.
A lot of disgruntled people here who say, wait a minute, our grandparents, just like I said, went to school and they had a tremendous affection for this country.
It creates a lot of tension. I understand it. But at the same time, if you look at around the world, now we always strive to be the best, but America is still the best country in assimilating immigrants from other places into its culture. So although we still have certain towns and cities where it almost feels like you're in another place, we're the best at assimilating immigrants into our culture. You look at Europe and the current wave of immigrants coming from the Middle East, there are places you go where it doesn't even look like Europe anymore.
I know. I used to have a friend who was from Denmark. And I remember when we had discussions about the Scandinavian countries and how liberal they were with regard to immigration. They were welcomed with open arms. And suddenly, and I say suddenly, but after a number of years, they realized that the immigrants were using up some of the monies from the government for education, for health, you name it, they were using it. And now it sounds like the Danes, all the other countries in that area are absolutely, well, I'll put this very bluntly, they're xenophobic.
Yes.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, and that's what you saw with Brexit. You have a lot of European countries, especially in the north now, trying to move away from the very liberal immigration policies of the 90s and the 2000s. Germany is another one. Sweden. But that's a policy argument. You want to allow immigration, but you want to do a better job with programs that assimilate these immigrants into your culture rather than creating separate cultures. And then you kind of, I get the the people that have been living there for generations, they start losing a sense of nationality to them. They start losing a sense of what their country's about.
Yeah, that's what makes them xenophobic. I was so, for me, listening to her years and years ago, and then changing her opinion about things, it told me that you could love people, you could want to help them, but sometimes it's going to affect you, and you got to be realistic. And a lot of the people are not. They don't understand. But let's move on again. So how many criminal backgrounds of potential employees been used by employers to unlawfully discriminate against applicants?
It happens a lot, but there are various issues to it. If someone committed a crime, no matter how bad it is, and this happened 5, 10, 15 years ago, and they've rehabilitated themselves already, they've held numerous jobs, there's no way an employer is going to be able to show that that past crime should be used as an issue to prevent this employee from working there. Obviously, if you've committed bank robbery, you're not going to get hired by a bank. If you were a drug dealer, you're not going to get hired by a pharmacy. But there's a test that has to be done by the employer to determine how the past crime relates to the current duties and responsibilities of the open position. And then they can determine if they deny it or not. Most of the time, the employer will not be able to deny that position.
Oh, very interesting. They can't deny it, huh? And so if they can't deny it, then where do people stand in this society when there are so many people looking for jobs? And that's another thing. And then they send the jobs overseas. There must be some kind of reason that's done.
Absolutely. And most employers deny it for the wrong reasons, and then there's a valid claim against the employer, and I've handled many of those. The toughest issue with criminal background are those that are recently out of prison, and they just have not had the opportunity to find a job. And then it's difficult to meet that test because, on one hand, you feel for the employee because they're trying to get back into the workplace and become a good working member of society. On the other hand, the employer feels, well, we haven't seen any history of rehabilitation yet. They've spent the last X amount of years in prison. How do we trust them? So it's a balancing test.
Yeah, something very interesting. We spend money on so many different programs and so many different projects that are really about war, giving money to our fight in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. And yet, when it comes to things like you're talking about, there isn't a lot of money available. And people just are so frustrated because, again, there's so much turmoil going on in this country because of the fact that after 2011, everything changed. Absolutely everything. So now what I want you to do is take us through a court scene where you have an immigrant who you're supporting, and how does it work? Give us an idea about, make us lawyers for the moment.
Sure. So you want me to talk about an immigrant on trial?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's say this is in federal court, and the immigrant will say was not paid his proper wages and was denied overtime. So in a wage in our case, it's very straightforward. The onus is on the employer to keep records, to pay taxes, and to provide the employee with the proper pay stubs and pay records to show how they're paid, what their hourly rate is or their salary, and all of that. And if the employer can't provide that, then the employee's testimony is taken as truth. So we put the employee on the stand and talk about what he did, how he did it, all the hard work he put in, how many hours he worked, and if he kept his own records, even better. And we put the employer on the stand and cross-examine them to find holes in their testimony. Ultimately, most of these cases are a lot easier to prove than many people think because employers that don't pay the proper wages don't keep their records, and that's a huge problem for employers.
I see. Again, tell us a little story that really was one of the major stories or major situations that you were in. I'd love to hear something that is pretty interesting so that our audience can understand how you deal with things and what is your job and how do you, and should they go into the law that you practice. So give us a story about that, if you would.
Sure. I'll talk about a client. This is a disability discrimination case who we went to trial and we were successful obtaining a huge verdict. This is against the managing company and the co-op where he worked as a super in the Bronx in New York. This guy worked as a super for many years and was always an excellent worker. And then he was diagnosed with a medical condition that required him to take frequent bathroom breaks, also because of the medication he was taking, so he can urinate. The other porters and management in the company refused to allow him to take bathroom breaks and painted him as this serial complainer, disgruntled employee who's lazy, who just wants to take breaks, and they thought he was doing God knows what in the bathroom. And he provided numerous doctor's notes saying, my patient needs to use the bathroom, otherwise he can urinate himself. They allowed him to urinate himself multiple times on the job. You can imagine how embarrassing that is. And no matter how much he complained, we had emails, tons of emails, at night, in the morning, in the daytime, they would just laugh at him or paint him out to be this lazy, bad person. And we took it to trial and just ripped apart through the defense because he was very meticulous in his record keeping and emails, and it really resonated with the jury that this guy, when I first met him, and so many other attorneys turned him away, I just felt bad for him because you could see in his eyes this is a person that's been hurt and injured multiple times by his employer and who just willfully refused to help him. And we were able to, he still worked there. They didn't fire him. So we were able to receive a huge verdict in emotional distress damages and punitive damages, which punished the employer for their reckless conduct.
Oh, my goodness. That is an amazing story. How very interesting that you were able to do that. So what are the types of workplace discrimination, and what should employees look for?
Okay. So there's various issues that happen in the workplace, most of which are not illegal. So if you're being bullied or just generally harassed because your coworker or your employer doesn't like you for whatever reason, that's not illegal. But you cannot be treated differently if you're in a protected class, and that is if it's due to your race, religion, national origin, gender, which includes sexual harassment, pregnancy, disability, which also requires an accommodation for a disability, and age, as well as criminal background, which we covered earlier.
Right. Now, if a young person decides to become a lawyer like you, what advice would you give them?
Be passionate about what you do. If you think you're going into the profession for the money, it's just not true. Not in today's economy, not in today's times, maybe 30, 40 years ago. You have to love what you do, and there's so many other fields where you could, not just employment, where you can help people. Be passionate about what you do, and pick the right school where they are good at placing people at jobs and not just good at taking your money and giving you a degree.
Right. That's very important information. Now, last but not least, how would an employee seek for a medical condition and suffering that they're suffering from? Can they get money for that? Are they eligible for that?
So if the employee has a medical condition that prevents them from working, then they're considered fully disabled, and they can collect Social Security disability, long-term, short-term. They're also entitled to, depending on the size of the employer, unpaid medical leave. But if they can still work and perform their job duties but with an alteration or an accommodation, then they need to get that information from their doctor and present it to the employer. So, for example, if you're working as, we'll go back to my case, if you're working as a super at a building and the accommodation you're requesting is to take more frequent bathroom breaks, let's say every 30 minutes, there's plenty of porters and other employees in the building that can cover for you for 5 minutes while you're using the bathroom. That's not an undue burden on the employer, and you should be accommodated. Whereas if you're an employee that needs to work from home because of your medical condition, but your job requires you to be in the office, that's probably an accommodation that won't be granted.
Oh, boy, that's interesting. And as far as the issues of the president, do you feel that the public can voice their opinions and get the president to change his mind? Because somehow he's very, very desirous of building this wall and letting immigrants out. He doesn't think that they're going to be valued to our country. I mean, that is, from my point of view, that's really tough. And I remember just another story. I remember a movie called El Norte. And in El Norte, there was a sister and a brother who were leaving Latin America because of all the prejudices and all the biases and all the fact that there were no jobs. And they came across to America, and they were such a wonderful young people who decided that they were going to work and give everything to this country. So they did. And sure enough, at some point, I guess it's the enforcement, the people who enforce immigration, got them and sent them back to their country. And because of the plight that they faced, she died because they went through the different tunnels in Mexico to get into America and got the plague. So I remember that, and it just makes me feel so sad for people who really want to work, really care about this country, and people who would do anything if we can let them stay here. Now, when you hear that, give me your last word. What do you think is going to happen, and how do you feel about the job that you're doing, because you're seemingly protecting these people?
The best way, you're absolutely right. You're not going to change this president or the way he thinks, because he's had years of training in the racism, the divisiveness, the xenophobia. The best way to change is to be a good member of society, to start at the bottom. If you're being discriminated against or if you have issues at work, then you complain. You complain properly and speak to an attorney. But also you have congressmen and senators that you complain to, because that's how you bring about change at the local level and then to the states, and then they'll be your voice up top to Capitol Hill and to Washington.
Wow. So my guest today has really spoke about the immigration issue and really has given us quite an opportunity if we want to see these people, these immigrants, stay in our country. We can support them by talking to our congressmen or talking to our senators. And Alex Umansky, you've been a wonderful guest because we've learned a lot about the immigration issues, and I want to thank you for being on the Susan Brender Show. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
3.
This show is brought to you by the Spectrum Firm Incorporated, a helping hand on the FCC highway. The Spectrum Firm specializes in FCC licensing, related engineering, and project management support in the private wireless industry. We offer FCC licensing, engineering support, and related services, including annual programs for license maintenance and renewal services, spectrum analysis, strategy, and frequency management. For more information, call 858-484-8502 at www.thespectrumfirm.com.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.